How would Canadians benefit from joining the United States, and what wouldn't be beneficial? If Canada were to join the United States, there would be both potential benefits and drawbacks. Here's a breakdown of both. Potential benefits. 1. Economic growth and trade. Canadian businesses would gain access to a much larger market without trade barriers, which could lead to economic expansion. The elimination of currency exchange between CAD and USD could simplify transactions and trade. 2. Increased military and security protection. Canada would benefit from the United States military budget and security resources. Border security between the two countries would become less of an issue. 3. More infrastructure and federal funding. The U.S. federal government could invest in Canadian infrastructure, such as highways, healthcare, and public projects. Some regions could benefit from federal subsidies similar to economically struggling U.S. states. 4. Stronger global influence. Canada's voice in global politics could be amplified as part of a larger and more powerful country. 5. Improved job mobility. Canadians could freely move, work, and live anywhere in the U.S. without visa restrictions. 6. Potential for lower prices. U.S. pricing and economies of scale could reduce costs on goods and services that tend to be more expensive in Canada. Potential drawbacks. 1. Loss of national identity and sovereignty. Canada's cultural, political, and historical identity could be overshadowed. Canadian institutions, such as the monarchy, the CBC, and legal systems, may be lost or integrated into U.S. systems. 2. Higher healthcare costs and loss of public healthcare. Canada's universal healthcare system could be at risk, with more privatization leading to higher out-of-pocket expenses. Americans pay significantly more for healthcare services than Canadians. 3. Weaker social policies and regulations. Canada has stronger social programs, such as paid parental leave, worker protections, and environmental laws, which may be weakened under U.S. governance. Gun control laws in Canada are much stricter than in the U.S., and many Canadians might oppose U.S. gun policies. 4. Regional disparities in political influence. Canadian provinces would become U.S. states with potentially less influence than they have as part of an independent nation. Western and Eastern Canada might not have enough representation in U.S. Congress compared to larger U.S. states. 5. Cultural and social differences. Canadian values and political leanings tend to be more progressive, while the U.S. has greater political polarization. Canadians could lose influence over domestic policies as the country becomes part of a much larger federation. 6. Potential economic disruptions. The U.S. dollar and tax structures could impact Canadian businesses and the economy. Provinces with resource-driven economies might struggle with different U.S. policies on natural resources. Overall, while joining the U.S. could offer economic and security benefits, Canada would lose its sovereignty, cultural identity, and strong social programs. Many Canadians would likely oppose such a move due to these concerns. How could the U.S. make this work for Canadians? For the United States to make a potential union with Canada work in a way that benefits Canadians, it would need to address several major concerns and ensure that Canadian values, identity, and key policies are protected. Here's how the U.S. could make it more appealing. 1. Guaranteeing healthcare protections. Maintain a version of Canada's universal healthcare system as a state-level or federally supported program for former Canadian provinces. Allow Canadians to opt into a public option that mirrors their current system, avoiding U.S.-style private healthcare dominance. 2. Preserving Canadian culture and identity. Ensure bilingualism, English and French, remains protected, especially in Quebec. Maintain cultural institutions like the CBC, Canadian Content Regulations, and Indigenous governance structures. Allow former Canadian provinces to retain their own legal and education systems instead of defaulting to U.S. state models. 3. Political representation and statehood balance. Allow Canada to join as a block of new states rather than breaking it up completely, ensuring political influence in the Senate. Guarantee that Canada's voice is protected in federal decision-making, preventing it from being overshadowed by more populous U.S. states. Consider a special legislative agreement allowing Canadian-born citizens to run for high offices, including the presidency. 4. Gun control and public safety. Allow former Canadian provinces to maintain their current gun laws instead of adopting looser U.S. regulations. Ensure that public safety, policing, and criminal justice reforms continue to align with Canadian values. 5. Economic and trade protections. Implement tax policies that don't disproportionately affect Canadian industries, especially natural resources, agriculture, and energy. Allow Canadian businesses to maintain their competitive advantages rather than being absorbed by larger U.S. corporations. Prevent job losses by ensuring fair wage laws that align with Canada's labor protections. 6. Immigration and social benefits. Maintain or improve Canada's immigration policies, which differ significantly from the U.S. model. Ensure that social benefits like paid parental leave, affordable education, and labor protections remain intact. 7. Military and foreign policy considerations. Give Canada a say in U.S. foreign policy, particularly regarding military conflicts and defense strategies. Ensure that Canadian military traditions and operations are preserved instead of being fully absorbed into the U.S. system. 8. A gradual integration plan. Instead of an abrupt merger, allow a transition period of 10, 20 years where policies can be aligned and tested. Hold referendums at provincial and territorial levels to allow Canadians to decide on specific aspects of integration. Create a bilateral committee with Canadian and U.S. lawmakers to oversee the transition. Final thought. For Canadians to support joining the U.S. government would need to respect Canada's social policies, political influence, and cultural identity while offering clear benefits like economic growth, job mobility, and security. If these guarantees were in place, more Canadians might be open to the idea, but it would still be a tough sell. Why does Trump want Canada to become part of the U.S.? President Donald Trump's interest in annexing Canada stems from several strategic considerations. 1. Economic interests. Resource acquisition. Canada possesses vast reserves of critical minerals essential for modern industries. Trump has expressed a desire to access these resources to bolster the U.S. economy and reduce dependence on other countries. Trade imbalances. Trump has frequently highlighted the U.S. trade deficit with Canada. By integrating Canada into the U.S., he believes it would eliminate trade barriers and address perceived imbalances. 2. National security. Border control. Trump has raised concerns about illegal border crossings and the smuggling of substances like fentanyl from Canada into the U.S. He argues that annexation would enhance border security and streamline immigration control. Geopolitical strategy. By incorporating Canada, the U.S. would expand its territorial reach, providing strategic advantages in the Arctic and increased security against potential threats from adversarial nations. 3. Expansionist vision. Manifest destiny. Trump has invoked the concept of manifest destiny, suggesting a belief in the U.S.'s right to expand its territory. This perspective aligns with his proposals to annex not only Canada, but also other regions like Greenland and the Panama Canal. It's important to note that these proposals have been met with significant resistance from Canadian officials and the public. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has firmly rejected the idea, emphasizing Canada's sovereignty and independence. Public opinion polls indicate that the vast majority of Canadians oppose becoming part of the U.S., with 90% expressing disapproval. In summary, President Trump's annexation ambitions are driven by economic, security, and expansionist motives. However, these proposals face substantial opposition from both Canadian leadership and the populace, making such a union highly improbable. How could Trump force Canada to join? Forcing Canada to join the U.S. would be extremely difficult and highly unlikely due to legal, political, and military barriers. However, if Trump or any U.S. administration attempted to push annexation, it could theoretically happen in one of the following ways. 1. Economic pressure and trade manipulation. Trade war and sanctions. The U.S. could impose severe tariffs, export bans, or economic sanctions on Canada to pressure its government into negotiations. Energy dependency. The U.S. could manipulate access to oil, natural gas, and other resources to weaken Canada's economy. Buyout of Canadian companies. Large-scale acquisitions of Canadian industries by American firms could shift economic control over time. 2. Political destabilization and influence campaigns. Disrupt Canadian politics. The U.S. could covertly fund or support political movements in Canada that favor annexation. Divide and conquer strategy, encouraging certain provinces, e.g. Alberta, which has some separatist tendencies to secede from Canada and join the U.S., could weaken national unity. Election interference. If a pro-U.S. candidate gained power in Canada through external influence, they could push policies toward unification. 3. Military coercion, highly unlikely. Show of force. The U.S. could increase military presence near Canada to intimidate leadership. Cyber warfare. The U.S. could target Canadian government institutions to create instability. Direct invasion, almost impossible. A military takeover would trigger severe international backlash, NATO intervention, and potential armed resistance. 4. Treaty manipulation and diplomatic isolation. Leverage NATO. The U.S. could threaten to withdraw military support for Canada unless it agrees to closer integration. USMCA and trade agreements. The U.S. could use legal loopholes in trade deals to gradually integrate Canadian policies into American governance. United Nations pressure, using diplomatic channels to isolate Canada or force policy changes that weaken its independence. 5. Social and cultural integration, media, and information warfare, flooding Canadian media with pro-American narratives to normalize the idea of annexation. Cross-border migration, encouraging large-scale American migration to Canada to shift demographics and voting patterns. Economic merging, if enough Canadian businesses, banks, and policies align with the U.S. political union could follow. Why this would likely fail. Canadian resistance. Canadians overwhelmingly oppose U.S. annexation. International backlash. Countries like the UK, EU, and China would strongly oppose and retaliate. Military response. Canada as part of NATO, and an aggressive U.S. move could trigger international conflict. U.S. legal and political barriers, a forced annexation, could lead to constitutional crises in both countries. Conclusion. While Trump could attempt to pressure Canada economically or politically, outright force would be nearly impossible without severe global consequences. Even economic and political strategies would likely backfire due to strong Canadian nationalism and international pushback. Will this merger ever happen? Yes or no? No, this will almost certainly never happen. Canada values its independence, and the political, legal, and cultural barriers are too great. There is no significant movement in Canada pushing for union with the US, and most Canadians would strongly oppose it. So there you have it. There's not a snowball's chance in hell of this happening, according to AI. If you enjoyed examining this question with AI, please like and subscribe so we can make more videos. Thanks for watching.